Where the Water Rose. A Love Story Born in the Waves. Ashley Baker and James Candid. Tohoku, Japan, March 2011. Prologue, The Rooftop. Minamisanraku, Japan. March 11, 2011. 2:52 p.m. The ocean has disappeared from the horizon. She didn't hear the sirens at first. Ashley Baker was on the third floor of the Minamisanraku guest house, her camera pressed to her face, trying to capture the perfect angle of afternoon light on the fishing harbor below. The water had a strange bronze quality to it, golden and still, the kind of stillness that felt less like peace and more like the world holding its breath. Then the floor moved. Not subtly. Not like the little tremor she'd felt twice already in her 3 days in Japan. Those polite little shudders that made the lamp sway and the locals glance up briefly before returning to their tea. This was something different. Something ancient and angry. The building groaned like a living thing. Plaster dust raining from the ceiling like snow. Jishin. An earthquake. She knew the word now. She'd learned it the same way she'd learned every word, by listening, by watching faces, by cataloging sounds the way other people collected stamps. She grabbed her pack. Passport, camera, notebook. The 3 sacred objects. She made it down 2 flights of stairs before the building gave a second. More violent lurch and the staircase below her simply wasn't there anymore. Collapsed into itself like a deflated cake. She went up. The roof was chaos. Other guests. A man in a business suit screaming into a phone. An elderly Japanese couple holding each other with the practiced calm of people who had survived other things. Ashley ran to the edge, looked south toward the harbor, and felt every cell in her body go cold. The ocean was coming back. Not gently. Not with the patience of a tide. It was coming back all at once, a black wall of water 20, 30, 40 feet tall, and it was swallowing the harbor, the docks, the restaurants, the fishing boats, the low-slung buildings along the seafront, all of it disappearing into something dark and roaring and absolute. The sirens screamed. The couple dropped to their knees. The businessman's phone fell from his hand. Ashley Baker from Shreveport, Louisiana, who had kayaked the Atchafalaya Basin, who had climbed rocks in New Mexico, who had talked her way into a press credential in 3 languages in Marrakesh, looked at the gap between her rooftop and the building next door, 12 feet across, 4 feet down onto a lower roof, and she ran. She did not look at the water. She looked at where she needed to land. She jumped. Her boots hit the tiles of the adjacent roof and she tucked and rolled, losing skin on her left palm, coming up already moving toward the next building higher, the water now audible. A sound like a freight train and a waterfall combined, the sound of a world ending, getting louder, getting closer. She jumped again. And again. 3 rooftops. 4. The water surged beneath her. She could see it in her periphery, brown and churning, carrying a car, a refrigerator, an entire wooden house spinning slowly like a toy. On the 5th roof, the highest one, a concrete commercial building, she stopped. There was nowhere left to jump. She pressed her back against the stairwell housing and held onto a pipe with both hands and watched the world drown. 37 minutes. She would count them later. 37 minutes before the water began to slow. She was alive. She was alive, and somewhere in that ruined, waterlogged city, she was thinking about the American with the Oklahoma drawl who had made her laugh so hard 3 days ago she'd spilled her matcha tea. She was thinking about James. Chapter 1. 72 hours earlier. Sendai Station, March 8, 2011. Morning. Cherry blossom season is 3 weeks away. Everyone keeps saying so. The first thing Ashley noticed about him was that he was reading the train departure board in Japanese. Not slowly. Not squinting with the translation app open in one hand. Reading it. His eyes moving line to line with the easy confidence of comprehension. She recognized that look. She wore it herself whenever she navigated a foreign transit system in a language she'd spent years eating alive. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn canvas jacket with too many pockets, the kind that said I travel often and I've learned what I actually need. Dark hair, a jaw that needed attention from a razor, and an expression of focused calm that she associated with people who were genuinely comfortable being alone in unfamiliar places. She'd been standing at the same board for 4 minutes. She knew her train. She was simply watching him. He turned, caught her looking, and instead of the usual flicker of self-consciousness, he just nodded. Easy. Natural. Like they'd already established some understanding. Sendai to Ishinomaki, he said. In English. With an unmistakable Oklahoma cadence. Ashley blinked. How did you know I spoke English? You've been mumbling the romanji under your breath for 4 minutes, he said. But your accent when you do it is American. Deep South if I had to guess. She felt the corner of her mouth pull despite herself. Louisiana. Oklahoma. He extended a hand. James Candid. Ashley Baker. They shook hands with the formality of 2 people who both knew that strangers meeting in foreign train stations either became brief acquaintances or something else entirely, and who were both curious which this would be. You read Japanese, she said. Trying to. I've got about AB2 in reading. Conversation's rougher. The politeness levels get me. He tilted his head. You. About the same. Maybe a little further with spoken. I've been here 2 weeks already, just listening to everything. He looked at her the way people look at something they hadn't expected to find. Not startled. Recalibrating. What else do you speak? He asked, and the question had the weight of genuine curiosity, not small talk. French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic. Working on Portuguese. She watched his face. You. He smiled then, not a small smile. A real one, the kind that shifted his whole face. French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic. Working on Japanese. A beat of silence while they both processed this. That's either a coincidence, Ashley said, or the universe is messing with us. I'm going with messing with us, James said. Same train. Same train. Chapter 2. The language between languages. The train to Ishinomaki. 1 hour and 12 minutes. Window seats facing each other. They discovered, over the course of the journey, that they had developed the same strange habit independently. When they arrived somewhere new, they listened for 3 days before they spoke. Just absorbed. Let the phonemes settle into patterns. Let the music of the language come before the grammar. I call it soaking, Ashley said. I call it stalking, James said. But that sounds worse out loud. She laughed, genuinely, catching herself surprised by it, and spilled approximately half her matcha tea on the little tray table between them. James produced, from one of his many-pocketed jacket's many pockets, a small cloth. She stared at it. Do you just carry a cloth? I travel a lot, he said simply, already mopping up the tea. I've learned what I actually need. She filed this information away alongside his posture, his reading speed, the way he'd noticed her before she noticed him. They talked about food, why they'd each specifically come to the Tohoku region, why Sendai's Jutan grilled beef tongue had been worth the 17-hour flight, how Ashley had eaten something in a tiny izakaya the night before that she still couldn't identify but planned to find again before she left. They talked about what it meant to truly love a culture versus to consume it, a distinction they'd both apparently argued about with people who didn't understand the difference. Most people visit a country, Ashley said, watching the Japanese countryside blur past the window. I want to live inside its language for a while. Like wearing it. James was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. That's exactly it. It was the quality of that quiet, neither filling the silence nor retreating from it, that Ashley would think about later. When they arrived at Ishinomaki, they had exchanged phone numbers, shared a transit IC card top-up, and argued respectfully about whether Arabic's root-based morphology or Mandarin's tonal system presented a steeper initial learning curve. They had not resolved the argument. They had agreed to continue it over dinner. Chapter 3. The second day. Ishinomaki Old Town. March 9, 2011. A fishing village that is also a small city. Manga murals on every wall. The smell of salt and miso everywhere. He was already at the ramen shop when she arrived 10 minutes early, which meant he'd been there for 20, which meant he was the kind of person who arrived early to absorb a place before the person he was meeting got there. She knew because she'd done the same thing and had to walk around the block twice. They ordered entirely in Japanese. The proprietor, an elderly man with an impressive set of laugh lines, watched them with barely concealed delight. Two Americans clearly speaking real Japanese, not tourist Japanese, debating in the language over the relative merits of shoyu versus miso broth. Nihongo desu ni, the man said finally, grinning. Your Japanese is skillful. Mata mata desu, they both said simultaneously. Still far to go. They looked at each other. The proprietor laughed so hard he had to put down the ladle. Over 2 bowls of the best ramen Ashley had ever consumed on any continent, they explored the town together. The Ishinomaki Manga Museum, the canals, the small Shinto shrine where an elderly woman was raking gravel in the cold with the focused concentration of someone doing something sacred. James photographed the architectural details. Ashley photographed the people. She realized she was paying attention to his eye, what he chose, what he let go. At the shrine, she bought 2 small Emma, wooden wishing plaques, from the Miko at the booth. She handed one to James without explanation. What do I write? He asked. What do you want? She said. He thought about it for a long time. Longer than she expected. Then he wrote something in kanji carefully with the concentration of someone who still had to think about stroke order. Can I see? She asked. No, he said pleasantly. She laughed. He hung his plaque on the rack with the others and looked at it for a moment, and she had the strong feeling that whatever he'd written, he'd meant it. They walked the canal as the sun went down, the water turning gold, the fishing boats rocking gently at their moorings. What made you want to learn 5 languages? James asked. My grandmother spoke Creole, Ashley said. She used it like a key, like there were rooms in her that only opened in that language. I wanted to have rooms like that. A lot of them. He nodded. Not the polite nod of someone processing, but the deep nod of someone who understood exactly. My grandfather was a Comanche code talker's grandson, he said. He told me that a language isn't just words. It's a way of looking. You lose a language, you lose an entire angle on the world. Ashley stopped walking. She looked at him in the last of the golden light. James Candid, she said. Where have you been? He smiled at the canal. Oklahoma mostly. But I keep leaving. Chapter 4. The Joke and the Promise. A small izakaya, March 10, 2011. The night before everything. Low tables, warm sake, a television in the corner playing highlights of a baseball game. They were 3 days into knowing each other, which was 3 days longer than Ashley usually needed to decide whether someone was worth continued attention. She had decided on day 1. She was still deciding what to do about it. The television showed a map. A seismologist was speaking in rapid Japanese, pointing to a fault line off the Sanriku coast. There had been a notable tremor that afternoon. Nothing alarming, the locals said. But the man on television looked the way weather forecasters look when they're being professionally calm about something they're actually worried about. James watched the screen. They're saying increased seismic activity in the region. Probably nothing. Probably nothing, Ashley agreed. They looked at each other. Then James leaned back, sake cup in hand, and said with the easy delivery of someone who did not know yet how unfunny the next 48 hours would make this. Well, if there's a big earthquake, I'll meet you at the top of the tallest building you can find. High ground. Wherever you end up. Ashley raised her cup. Deal. Tallest building. High ground. And bring snacks, he added. I'm not surviving a disaster without snacks. She laughed. She clinked her cup against his. The sake was warm and the izakaya was warm, and James Candid was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who is trying to memorize something. Tomorrow I'm going to Minamisanraku, she said. You. Same direction. I want to see the coastline. Then I'll see you when I see you, she said, which was her way of not saying what she wanted to say. James looked at her for a moment. Then, you'll see me, which was his way of saying something back. She thought about it on the walk back to her guest house. She thought about it in the way you think about things that have already happened but haven't been spoken yet. The city was quiet and cold and the stars were very clear, and somewhere underneath everything the tectonic plates were doing what tectonic plates do: slow, enormous, inevitable. Chapter 5. The Ground Moves. Ishinomaki, March 11, 2011. 2:46 p.m. The largest earthquake ever recorded in Japan. Magnitude 9.0. James was at a Harborview cafe, annotating a hand-drawn map of the Oshika Peninsula in his notebook, when the world came apart. He had experienced earthquakes before. A 6.2 in Oaxaca, a swarm of small ones in Iceland, but this was nothing like those. This was the earth declaring something. The ground moved in long, slow, nauseating waves like being on a ship in heavy swell, except the ship was the entire island of Honshu. The cafe emptied in seconds. James had already grabbed his pack. Always packed, always ready. This was the habit of someone who'd learned, and was out the door before the ceiling tiles fell. Outside, people were running. Not in the directionless panic of movies. In Japan, earthquake drills were real, muscle memory was real. People were moving toward high ground. James moved with them, processing in rapid Japanese the shouts around him. The harbor, the warning, the wave. Tsunami. He knew the word because it was originally Japanese. He knew what it meant because he had read about 2004, about the Indian Ocean, about what walls of water do to coastlines. He moved. Fast, deliberate, up. But as he ran, as his legs carried him uphill through the shaking streets, a single thought ran underneath all the training and all the instinct. Ashley was in Minamisanraku. Minamisanraku was on the coast. He ran faster. There was no reaching her. He knew that. The phones were down, the roads were becoming rivers. The rational part of his mind, the part that spoke 5 languages and annotated maps, understood that survival was individual and immediate. The other part of his mind was already making calculations. Where would she go? What had she said? High ground. Tallest building. High ground. Wherever you end up. He reached a hillside temple, Hirayama Park, high above the city, and he turned and watched what happened to the harbor below. He watched it without words in all 5 languages, which meant he watched it in silence, because there are things that no language has words for yet. The water came in and covered everything. He did not know if she was in it. He sat down on the cold ground of the hillside and he waited, because waiting was the only useful thing, and he tried not to think about Louisiana women who spilled matcha tea and carried cameras everywhere and knew when to jump. He thought about it anyway. Chapter 6. The Meeting Place. The hillside above a ruined city. March 11, 2011. Late afternoon. The water is receding. The air smells of salt and something worse. Ashley Baker, who had jumped 4 rooftops and held a pipe for 37 minutes while the ocean tried to claim her, was moving again. She was alive. She had established this. She had checked herself in the methodical way her outdoor education instructor at LSU had taught her. Head, neck, torso, limbs. Left palm bleeding. Right knee bruised. Everything else functional. Move. She was on a high concrete building. Below her the water had lowered, but the streets were unrecognizable. Debris fields, rivers of mud, cars stopped at impossible angles. The city she'd walked 2 days ago was gone. Not damaged. Gone. She needed to get to higher ground. Permanent higher ground. Away from the water, in a place where rescue services could eventually reach. She thought, without meaning to. Tallest building. High ground. Wherever you end up. She almost laughed. It came out wrong, too close to a sob, so she let it go and started moving. There was a hillside. She could see it. There were other survivors moving toward it, picking through the debris, helping each other. The quiet heroism of ordinary people in extraordinary moments. Ashley moved with them, stopping twice to help. Once to assist an elderly man whose sandals had been lost, once to translate rapidly between a crying child and a rescue worker who spoke no English, which the child's parents did. Her Japanese held. She was grateful for the 3 weeks of listening. She was picking her way up a hillside path, a walking trail that had become a refugee corridor, when she saw him. He was coming down the path toward her. Coming down. Which meant he had been up there on the high ground, and now he was coming back toward the city, toward the water, and that made no rational sense at all unless they stopped 3 feet apart on the muddy hillside path. James Candid looked at her. She was covered in dust and plaster, her palm was wrapped in the sleeve she'd torn off her jacket, and she was standing on her own 2 feet on a hillside above a drowned city with the expression of someone who had decided not to fall apart yet. He had come back down the path. He would not say why, not for a long time. He didn't need to. High ground, she said. Tallest building, he said. She walked the last 3 feet. He opened his arms. She walked into them, and they stood there on the hillside above the ruined city while the emergency sirens sounded and strangers moved around them toward safety. And neither of them said anything for a long time because they were in a language that didn't have words yet, and they were both just learning it. He had come back down. She would remember that. Always. Chapter 7. Surviving Together. An emergency shelter in the hills above the coast. March 11 to March 14, 2011. The shelter was a community center. A large, low building that smelled of industrial cleaning products and suddenly of too many people. They were given space on the floor, thin blankets, rice balls wrapped in plastic. James ate his. Ashley ate hers and then the one he'd been about to offer her. I said bring snacks, he said. You said survive, she said. They became useful. This was who they were, people who looked at a chaotic situation and found a function. James moved supplies, translated between Japanese rescue workers and foreign tourists who had no Japanese at all, helped organize a charging station for the few phones with remaining battery. Ashley photographed, carefully, respectfully, only what she was given permission to photograph, and helped a young Japanese woman whose husband was unaccounted for draft a message to her husband's family in Osaka, in Japanese, then in English, then helped her send it when a satellite phone briefly worked. They slept side by side on the floor in the third row, their backs to each other for warmth in the first night when the building was cold, and by the second night they had turned around without discussing it, and Ashley's head was against his shoulder and James's arm was around her in the uncomplicated way of people who have decided that survival is easier together. They talked through the nights when sleep wouldn't come. About everything. The kind of talking you do when you have nothing left to lose, when the ordinary social calculations of impression management and vulnerability protection have been swept away along with everything else. He told her about his father's ranch in Oklahoma, about the way the sky there was so big it felt like information, about the languages he'd learned one by one like unlocking doors, about the relationship that had ended last year, gently, without bitterness, with the honest accounting of someone who had learned from it. She told him about New Orleans, about her grandmother's kitchen where everything had a story and a language, about a photograph she'd taken in Marrakesh that had been published and changed her life's direction, about the way she'd always felt that she was looking for something specific without knowing what it was, and had kept moving because motion felt like looking. I think I might have found it, she said on the second night, staring at the ceiling in the dark. A pause. Then, I think I did too. She didn't turn around. He didn't move his arm. But she reached up and found his hand in the dark and they lay like that while the shelter breathed around them and somewhere outside, the ocean lay still and indifferent over the things it had taken. Chapter 8. The Way Out. Sendai City and Sendai Airport. March 15 to 17, 2011. Getting out was complicated. The direct routes were destroyed. The airports were closed, then partially reopened, then restricted to emergency and repatriation flights. They navigated it together, his organizational mind and her improvisational instincts proving to be, as they were discovering about most things, complementary. They filed into a list for emergency repatriation. They walked when they had to walk. When a self-defense forces truck offered a ride toward Sendai, Ashley negotiated the space in rapid Japanese by explaining that they were both medical translators, which was approximately 40% true. James in the back of the truck looked at her. Medical translators? We translated for medical situations, she said pleasantly. In the shelter. That was instructions for the bathroom. Medical adjacent. In Sendai, the airport was functioning on emergency protocols. Lines stretched for hours. Ashley photographed, with permission, always with permission, the stories happening around them. A grandmother recognizing her grandson across a crowd, a group of volunteers arriving from Osaka with boxes of supplies, a rescue dog sleeping on the feet of his exhausted handler. James moved through lines, negotiated in Japanese, found food when food was available, and kept track of the paperwork with the thoroughness of someone who understood that bureaucracies continued even in catastrophe, perhaps especially in catastrophe. On the second night in Sendai, in a hotel that was operating at emergency capacity with 2 people to a room and no one questioning any arrangements, they finally slept in an actual bed. Ashley was asleep before her head touched the pillow. James lay awake for a while and watched the ceiling and thought about Oklahoma and Louisiana and Tohoku, and the particular trajectory of his life that had landed him in this bed in this city next to this woman who had jumped 4 rooftops and negotiated truck rides with creative truth and was currently using his arm as a pillow. He thought, I came back down the path. He thought I would do that again. He thought, I am going to have to figure out what happens next. He fell asleep. Epilogue. Departure gate. Next stop Australia. Sendai Airport. March 18, 2011. Gate 7. An emergency repatriation flight is boarding. Neither of them is going home. The flight manifest said. Sendai, Sydney. Neither of them had planned to go to Australia. Neither of them had tickets. They had presented themselves to the repatriation desk separately and then together and then, after a conversation that was part English and part Japanese and included Ashley making a case that James found simultaneously unnecessary and impressive, they had been given 2 seats on an emergency Qantas flight departing in 4 hours. Australia, James said, looking at the manifest. Australia, Ashley confirmed. Do you know anything about Australia? The language, she said, is technically English, which gives us a head start. Neither of us speaks Australian. We'll learn, she said. That's what we do. He looked at her. She was wearing borrowed clothes, a fleece 2 sizes too large and hiking pants she'd traded for in the shelter using her backup camera lens as currency, and her left hand was properly bandaged now, and she had the particular glow of a person who has been through something enormous and come out not diminished but clarified. He thought about the Emma he'd hung at the Ishinomaki shrine. He'd written, in careful kanji, Chuhoyorachieni, cherished the encounters. They walked toward the gate together. The airport was crowded and noisy and full of the particular emotional weather of a major disaster's aftermath, grief and relief and the strange flat exhaustion of survival. They moved through it the way they'd moved through everything. Aware of it, present in it, not consumed by it. At the gate, waiting in the final boarding queue, James reached over and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically. The way you take someone's hand when the taking of it is the answer to a question that's been building for days. Ashley looked at their joined hands. Then at him. Australia, she said. Australia, he agreed. And then. He smiled, the real one, the one that shifted his whole face. And then wherever. She leaned up and kissed him briefly, with the practical affection of someone who intends to do this regularly, and is simply establishing the practice. He looked for a moment like a man who has found the specific thing he'd been leaving Oklahoma to look for. They boarded the plane. The city behind them was changed forever. The ocean had taken and the ocean had given back, and between the taking and the giving, something had begun. They flew south hand in hand, into a new continent, into a new sky, into the particular future.